Dear ladies and gentlemen, I don't know how much people are listening to us. I have the pleasure to introduce the lecturer from Ljubljana, my younger colleague, art historian Helena Seražin. She will present us the life and the work of Helena Vurnik, painter and designer of Austrian origin. She studied and worked in Vienna, but then she married a Slovene architect, Ivan Vurnik, and after that she moved in Slovenia. There she continued her work, mainly in collaboration with her husband, supporting him in his search for new Slovene national style, contributing decoration to his buildings in different techniques, frescoes, mosaics, enamel, and also helping him in graphic design. So Helena Seražin is working as a senior research advisor at the Institute of Art History within the Research Center of Academy of Sciences and Arts in Ljubljana. She graduated in art history in 1997, received her master's degree in 2000, and her doctoral degree from the University of Ljubljana in 2003. She continued then her education with the financial support, a scholarship from Andrea Palladio International Center for Architectural Studies, also Italian Ministry of Culture, and then also at Harvard University Center for Renaissance Studies in Florence, Villa Tatti. She was also visiting professor in Ljubljana, University of Ljubljana and University of Primorska. The main focus on her research is Renaissance and Baroque architecture and sculpture in Slovenia, with a focus on Venetian influences and Italian artists. But her research is in the field of architectural history also includes more recent modernist periods. She is the author of several scientific monographs, including, for example, architect Giorgio Massari. Then she published a big volume on villas in the Prava and Goriška region from 16th to 18th century. Then she published work on report on drawings of fortification by the architect Giovanni Pieroni. As the history at the Art History Institute, she is in charge of the project Artistic Topography of Slovenia. Within the framework of it, she edited several volumes in the series of books. She is a member of the editorial board of the scientific journal Arta Historiae Artis Slovenica, and a member of the editorial board of scientific journals Res Mobilis and Riha Journal. She's editor for the field of art history of the Slovenian Biographical Lexicon. And now we come to her research, which is more connected to our topic of women work. Between 2014 and 2018, she led the Slovenian partnership of the European project Momovo, Women Creativity from Modernism Onwards. Helena, I don't know how do you pronounce this Momovo in English. Okay. No, yeah.
Modern movement.
Okay, I will know. So, as a result of this project, she edited several international scientific monographs, such as Modern Movement Women, 100 Projects in 100 Years, European Women in Architecture and Design, 1918 to 2018. Modern Movement Women, designers, craftsmen, architects, and engineers between 1918 and 1945. And then women creativity since the modernist movement from 1918 to 2018 toward the new perception and reception, leading the project mapping the urban spaces of Slovenian cities in a historical framework, within which she was there was research done on the modernist Nova Gorica and its context. Currently, she leads the interdisciplinary program group Podoba, beseda knowledge, which is in English image word knowledge, the life of ideas in the area between the Eastern Alps and the Northern Adriatic between 1400 to 1800. And in the meanwhile, she is working on different projects such as Praetorian Palace in Koper, artwork as a reflection of knowledge and connection, and art during the decline of nobility, transformations, translocations, and reinterpretations. Since 2021, she is president of the Slovenian Art History Society. So that's the presentation. I think that now I can give the floor to Helena. Okay.
Thank you, Breda, for this very long presentation. First of all, I would like to thank you to be here with me and patiently listening my presentation. Before I begin today's lecture topic, I must first shed light on the circumstances that led me as a specialist in Renaissance and Baroque architecture to devote myself to the study of 20th century architecture in the first place. As you could hear from Breda's presentation, I'm not much of a specialist for Art Nouveau architecture at all. In 2010, I attended the first symposium of the European Association of Architecture Historians in Guimarães in Portugal, where I met my Italian colleague, Caterina Franchini, of the Polytechnic of Turin, who was giving a talk in the section on women architects. Together, we realized that in general, we knew very few women architects, and soon came to realization that the reason for our ignorance was not that there were very few women architects or that they had not done anything significant, but mainly that almost no one was researching their lives and works. All the attention until then had been exclusively on male architects. And since not such research had been done, not much was known about the role of women architects and designers in architectural history. So the writers of important historical architectural outlines had completely overlooked them until then. Therefore, Caterina and I decided to apply for a European project under the Creative Europe call for proposals, together with colleagues from other European countries such as Spain, Portugal, France, the Netherlands, and Slovakia, aimed at researching and promoting women architects from all over Europe. The project, which took place between 2014 and 2018, was called Women's Creativity Since the Modern Movement. The project was called Women's Creativity Since the Modern Movement, but it's better known by the acronym MOMOWO, meaning Modern Movement Women. In Ljubljana, during the project period, in collaboration with the Ljubljana City Council and its tourist office, we set up an open-air exhibition on the Krakow embankment with short presentation of 20 Slovenian women architects and designers, which was the result of a series of smaller exhibitions entitled To the Fore, Female Pioneers in Slovenian Architecture, Building and Design, which we have been preparing since 2016 in collaboration with the Center of Architecture of Slovenia and the DESA Gallery. This March was the 5th exhibition in a row. The result of these exhibitions is also a monograph in which we briefly introduced 40 Slovenian women architects, builders, and designers, including the first pioneers, architects Dušana Šantel-Kanoni and Gisela Šuplje, who were the first women architects to graduate from the University of Ljubljana in 1932. The first with Professor Helena Vurnik and the second with Professor Jože Plečnik. Sonja Lapajne-Oblak, who studied with Professor Sonja Lapajne-Oblak, the first Slovenian women civil engineer, also graduated in 1932. And Jela Vilfan, who studied with Professor Josef Hofmann at the Vienna School of Applied Arts, is considered the first Slovenian women designer to graduate in 1934. Unfortunately, it turned out that the only artist who was in any way connected with architecture and design in Slovenia in the first period of the Great Ljubljana earthquake was the painter Helena Vurnik, who will be discussed today. Although I also became aware of the painter and designer Helena Vurnik during the Mumovo project, I was far from being the first to become aware of her. If we exclude her mention in the exhibition catalogue of the group exhibition at the Vienna Künstlerhaus in 1912 and 1913, the first entry about her was published only in 1986, when she was included in the Slovenian Biographical Dictionary. Brane Kovič dedicated a separate chapter to her in 1994 in the anthology that was created in connection with the large overview exhibition dedicated to her husband, the architect Ivan Vurnik. A few more exhibitions and publications followed, in which she was discussed in a group of women artists, and it was only in 2017, that the curator Andrej Smrekar prepared an independent overview exhibition on the painter at the National Gallery. Well, Andrej Smrekar, because of his excellent knowledge of Helena Kotler-Vurnik, would be a far more suitable speaker than I am today, probably. Because as part of the Mumovo project in 2016, I focused primarily on Helena's part that she left behind in architecture and design, where she worked primarily with her husband, the architect Ivan Vurnik. Together, they created a number of works in the interwar period, and the Cooperation Bank on Miklošičova Street, which has been the seat of the land registry since 2006, is certainly one of their most famous joint works. So today's lecture will be dedicated mostly to the part of Helena's work. Although I know you have probably heard a lot about Art Nouveau architecture in Ljubljana in the last decades of the Art Nouveau network existence, I would like to refresh your memory a little. When Ljubljana was hit by a catastrophic earthquake at Easter 1895, leading Viennese urban planners of the time were called in to rebuild the city, including architects Camillo Sitte and Max Fabiani, who immediately drew up a regulatory plan for Ljubljana. Fabiani's plan was chosen because it was more in line with the then modern Central European urban planning guidelines. Fabiani was mainly inspired by Vienna, with its so-called Ringstrasse, which borders the city center with wide boulevards. On the left, of course, Ljubljana, and on the right, Vienna. Between the old town under the castle hill and the city ring, he planned streets arranged in a regular grid, along which over 400 new, mostly multi-story buildings were newly constructed in the years 1896 to 1910. At the same time, he moved the city center to the vicinity of the intersection of the main city roads and the railway station near Sudnitsky or Slovenski Square, where most of Ljubljana's most beautiful Art Nouveau buildings are still located today. Which is no coincidence, because according to Fabiani's plan, the square was to become a kind of exhibition center of modern Art Nouveau architecture. Let me briefly show you a few of them just to refresh your memory. Fabiani himself designed Crisper's house in 1900, Bamberg's house in Miklošičeva in 1906, and Hriber's house in Slovenska cesta, not so far away, in 1902. At the beginning of Čopova Street, Hauptmann's house on Prešeren Square from 1904 with its picturesque Art Nouveau facade, work of architect Cyril Method Koch, stands next to the three bridges, and architect Josip Vancaš Citibank built a little further up the street at almost the same time. Along Miklošičeva Street, which led from Prešeren Square to the railway station, even more Art Nouveau buildings were built. In 1903, Friedrich Sigmund built Ljubljana's first department store at the beginning of the street, so-called Urbanet's house. A little further on, Josip Vancaš built the Hotel Union in 1904, and in 1907, the People's Credit Bank, in the immediate vicinity of which the Cooperative Bank was built in 1921 and 1922, which, despite its basically modernist architecture, is counted among the group of architectures built under the influence of Art Nouveau. Cooperative Bank is conventional, with entry. Cooperative Bank's plan is conventional, with entry on the ground floor, followed by the main banking hall, subsidiary offices at the rear, and 4 floors of apartments facing the Miklošičeva Street. The facade has rectangular windows set simply in the walls, projecting bay windows running vertically along each edge, and a series of bay windows at the top floor. Stripped of its iconic painted surfaces, on the first glance, it wouldn't differ much from other modernist Art Nouveau buildings, such as Fabiani's Artaria. However, it is the facade's decoration that catches the eyes of the passing-by people. Onto a background painted salmon pink and white, architect overlaid the basic motif of the building's exterior, a simplified carnation known from embroideries. To them, he added vibrating abstracted medallions, bands of frets, and interlacing the juxtaposes blues, whites, reds, and yellow. Instead of three-dimensional moldings, architect used running bands of blue, white, and red in a relaxed zigzag pattern to provide forces along the front. The plans of the bank were made by the architect Ivan Vurnik. We can see him here with his later wife, Helena Vurnik. Vurnik was born in 1884 in the small provincial town of Radovljica into a family of stonemasons, engravers, and altar makers. He studied at the Polytechnic Institute in Vienna between 1907 and 1911, and continued his studies with Otto Wagner at the Academy of Fine Arts on the recommendation of Max Fabiani. After graduating in 1912, Vurnik went on a study tour for Rome. He then returned to Vienna where he worked for Ludwig Baumann, the successor to Friedrich Ullmann, who was in charge of work of the new Hofburg in Vienna, now the home of the National Library. Although Baumann employed him, Vurnik began his first independent designs in the field of church architecture in 1913. Also in 1913, Vurnik married Helena Kotler, a Viennese painter and graphic artist. Vurnik remained in Baumann's employment until 1915. Then he returned to Radovljica with his wife and continued to work on church architecture and furnishing projects. Soon he was drafted into the army and sent to the Isonzo front and later to Tyrol. During the war, after serious illness, he was sent to Serbia to plan military cemeteries. In early 1919, he and his wife moved into a flat in Ljubljana Castle and lived in Ljubljana ever since. In the same year, he was appointed as a part-time lecturer at the newly founded University of Ljubljana, where he became assistant professor of architecture at the technical faculty in 1920 and full professor in 1929. He is responsible for the establishment of the Department of Architecture and the appointment of Jože Plečnik as the other professor in Ljubljana to teach architecture composition. Plečnik was teaching at the Academy of Arts in Prague at the time. Vurnik also tried to win Fabiani over, but the latter declined the invitation. As mentioned above, Vurnik married Helena Kotler in 1913, who contributed to many of the paintings, mosaics, and interiors of his later work. Helena Kotler-Vurnik was born in the bourgeois family of the lawyer Moritz Kotler, who was a senior postal advisor at the postal agency, and Bronislava Truk, a descendant of Christianized Jews from Galicia. After she finished the city elementary school, Helena Kotler-Vurnik, in accordance with the expectations of the bourgeois society at the time, enrolled in the four-year secondary school of piano, and around 1901, in the School of Drawing and Watercolors. Her enthusiasm for arts became so overpowering that she, despite the disapproval of her parents, though with the support of her grandmother, first enrolled in the Vacation School of Graphic Design. After 4 years, she also attended the Damen Academy in Vienna. The curriculum of the Damen Academy represented a combination of high and applied arts. Apart from graphic design and decorative arts, the latter included handiworks. Academic professors favorably inclined toward the present modernism, such as Ludwig Michalek, Rudolf Jettmeyer, you can see some of his work here, and Max Fabiani lectured at the school. Fabiani taught ornamentation, styles, and modern home design part-time. Professor Jettmeyer even included Helena Vurnik in his department at the Academy of Fine Arts, but she never managed to complete her studies in painting at the same level as the graduated painters of the Academy. At the first glance, Helena Kotler-Vurnik's somewhat unusual path of art education was quite normal for the period before the First World War, as there were not many other opportunities for women in the Austro-Hungarian Empire at the time. In the first decades of the 20th century, Slovenian society remained deeply rooted in the conservative ways of life and thinking typical of the 19th century Austro-Hungarian Empire, to which Slovenia belonged until the end of the First World War. The empire was among the most backward countries in Europe in terms of women's education. The state's argumentation against this was based mainly on the following so-called facts. Contact of both sexes in the lecture hall poses a moral hazard. Lectures would have to be adapted as not to offend women's ears. Society has no need for female judges, lawyers, doctors, teachers, soldiers, etc. Men are the leaders and determine the social order. In their opinion, it was sufficient for young women to receive a compulsory elementary education limited to reading, writing, arithmetic, and so-called feminine subjects such as art, music, and literature. Women could receive this type of education in private or usually monastic schools designed to prepare them for the role of wife and mother. It was not until the new Elementary Education Act of 1869, when the need for teachers increased, that the state allowed the establishment of independent public and private teacher schools and lyceums, where women could receive higher education for the first time. However, this type of education was not sufficient to enroll in university. Only gymnasium or high school students who had passed the matriculation examination could enroll there. Since the state did not establish public gymnasia and secondary schools for women, but they were not allowed to study at the existing ones, the initiative to found women's gymnasia came from individuals and women's associations. They founded women's institutions with gymnasial instruction to prepare girls for the matriculation examination. Marianne Heinisch founded the first private girls' gymnasium in Vienna in 1871, and in 1872, the Ministry of Education and Religious Affairs issued a decree that allowed girls to enroll in the state gymnasia, but without issuing certificates confirming that they were prepared for university studies. Without this certificate, however, they could not officially continue their studies at any university in Empire. They were allowed to attend lectures only as extraordinary students or listeners, without receiving a diploma at the end, as Helena Vurnik also did. Therefore, the women went abroad to study, mostly at universities in Switzerland and Germany. The diplomas thus obtained were not allowed to be nostrified until 1896, and in the academic year 1897-98, women were finally able to enroll at the University of Vienna, but only at the Faculty of Arts. Gradually, other faculties were open to them, most recently the Academy of Fine Arts in 1920. For those women who wanted to study painting, sculpture, architecture, or design prior to 1919, the best solution was so-called Damenakademie in Vienna, Kunstschule für Frauen und Mädchen, or Art School for Women and Girls, which was established in 1897 as a private school and became public in 1908. There were three different seats of this school. I'm showing only the place at the time when Helena Vurnik attended the lectures. It was the female equivalent to the Academy für Bildende Künste, Wien, the Academy of Fine Arts in Vienna, The only other option for women ever since the establishment of the school in 1867 was the Kunstgewerbeschule, Arts and Crafts School at the Museum für Kunst und Industrie, Museum of Applied Arts in Vienna, where they were able to study design and architecture as well. However, since the degrees from the Kunstgewerbeschule did not permit graduates to work as independent architects, many of them continued their studies at one of the other universities abroad, mostly in Germany. The idea of a woman studying, for instance, at the technical university to become an architect or a civil engineer remained unheard of until 1920s. After graduating from school in 1910, Helena Kotler received a scholarship and embarked on an artistic journey through Italy. After her return, she got a job as an illustrator at the Viennese daily newspaper Illustrierte Wiener Extrablatt. Through her sister and her sister's husband, Dragan Šanda, she had already been in contact with a group of Slovenian intellectuals in Vienna before her meeting with Vurnik. In 1913, for example, she portrayed France Kimovec, who was Vurnik's friend and advisor, and later a close family friend of the couple. According to Andrej Smrekar, it was Kimovec who indicated to Vurnik that Helena would be suitable as his companion. Immediately after her marriage to Vurnik, she began to collaborate with him in the decoration of the diocesan chapel in Trieste, as Vurnik was attracted by the possibility of a joint collaboration in the creation of a total work of art, so-called Gesamtkunstwerk. In 1914, he wrote in a letter to Bishop Andrej Karlin of Trieste, a native of Slovenia, I quote, "One of the main reasons I married was to get in Helena a co-worker for our cultural work." End of the quote. Very romantic indeed. Vurnik had probably in mind a famous group of married couples from the Glasgow school called the Four, who exhibited in Vienna in 1900 and had a significant impact on Viennese secession. The couple, Charles Rennie Mackintosh and Margaret MacDonald, were probably the most important role models for him, as Mackintosh also initially designed the buildings and his wife Margaret contributed to their decoration. The collaboration of the couple in planning the total work of art, the architecture and its furnishings from furniture and wallpaper, stained glass and lamps to the smallest detail, must have strongly influenced Vurnik's ideas about married life with Helena Kotler, or about their complementary in the professional sphere as well. Vurnik saw in Helena a life companion in every sense of the word, who, like Margaret MacDonald Mackintosh, would complement his architectural projects with her painting. However, since Helena's artistic abilities were deficient due to the aforementioned limitations, the painter often fell behind with the execution of commissions, and Vurnik's confidence in her artistic abilities waned over time. The first joint work of the Vurnik couple was the diocesan chapel in Trieste. The mediator for this commission was most likely the aforementioned Kimovec, as he knew the Bishop of Trieste, Andrej Karlin, very well. Vurnik completed the architectural part of the order as early as 1913, and his interior design for the Bishop's chapel in Trieste was a dazzling demonstration of Gesamtkunstwerk, recalling with its glistening white and gold Wagner's St. Leopold's Church at Steinhof. Helena became involved in the chapel decoration phase. In addition to the cardboard for the frescoes from the life of Christ and the symbols of the four evangelists on the doors of the tabernacle, she painted the scenes of the Annunciation of Mary, St. Andrew, and Easter morning, and she made a model to a stonemason for a crucifix. Helena also drew on the aesthetics of the church at Steinhof in her work for the diocesan chapel. This was no coincidence, as the execution there was influenced by the Byron School, which played a leading role in the aesthetics of church art within the framework of Viennese Art Nouveau after the 1905 exhibition. For the Steinhof, the mosaics of the side altars were created by Helen's teacher, Rudolf Jetmar. The chapel in Trieste is thus designed in all respects in the Art Nouveau style. Echoes of the Steinhof stained glass windows can be found in Helena's design for a stained glass window with St. Mary for the new parish church in Jury around 1915. It's the drawing in the lower part of this slide. The design already shows a motif. If you pay attention to this motif here, that is repeated in slightly modified form on the pilasters in the Cooperative Bank in Ljubljana. Since Helena was late in submitting the commissions for the painting of the chapel, the First World War broke out and Helena was pregnant, though the work remained unfinished in Trieste. After her husband left for the army, Helena returned to her family in Vienna, as she felt very lonely in her husband's house in Radovljica, not knowing the Slovenian language. In 1916, in Vienna, she gave birth to a daughter, Mira, who later became a doctor. Immediately after the war in 1919, the second important joint commission of the Vurnik couple was created, the decoration of the presbytery in the church of St. Catherine in Topolovo near Medvode, where Vurnik's search for a national style in architecture is already evident. The traditional subject of the painting, St. Catherine, was portrayed in front of the judges for the altarpiece in accordance with the new spiritual aspirations. The figures are caught in a grid of verticals and horizontals, interrupted only by the diagonal of the saint's hand. All in all, it is strongly reminiscent of the flatness of early Christian art characteristics of the Byron School, in which form is subordinated to decorative solutions. In their philosophy, this speaks to a return to the beginnings of art, where art visualizes an idea, and study of nature is inherently unnecessary and harmful. The ancient Christian and even the pagan art of archaic Greece and Egypt can be good examples for Byron art because they are an authentic expression of religion. Atectonism can also be traced in architecture with the ornamental painting of architectural elements. Vurnik looked for examples in Slovenian medieval wall paintings. I show an example of a painted wall in the presbytery of the Church of St. Andrew in Mošnje, near Radovljica, near Vurnik's birthplace. And the colors are matched to the Slovenian tricolor, white, red, blue. The first attempts toward the Slovenian national style in art and architecture can be traced back to the beginning of the 20th century. Similar to Poland and Czech Republic, folk art was thought to be the artistic expression of the lower social strata, in contrast to the international art of the higher strata, which was actually national building, so that architects such as Method Koch, in building the Hotel Tivoli in Ljubljana, started from traditional architecture. He imitated Upper Carniolan folk architecture in developing a national style. On the other hand, the undoubtedly most innovative way, which in many respects comes closest to the Art Nouveau, was not based on architectural monuments of past eras, but on models of ethnographic tradition transferred to architecture. Like, for example, the Hungarian national style developed at the turn of the century by the Budapest architect Öden Lechner. I'm sorry if I pronounced it badly. When selecting patterns, he based them on the embroideries on the clothes of shepherds from Transylvania, which was then considered the most typical Hungarian landscape, and combined them in accordance with the then popular theory of the Indian and Persian origin of Hungarians, with elements of Indian and Persian art. In Ljubljana, the architect Ivan Janez Jager, a student among others of Max Fabiani, wrote in 1898 in a series of feature articles in the journal Slovenian Nation that modern architecture has no national feeling. In the context, he says, I quote, "We want to take this into account from now on, and it is our duty that we at least furnish and decorate our homes in the Slovene spirit," end of quote. Jager recommends reference to folk art and decorates the interior of the National Coffee House in Ljubljana, where the Pongrad's house in Ljubljana has just been renovated and rebuilt after the earthquake, using Easter eggs painted according to folk custom as a model for the ceiling and walls, as well as for the furniture and railings. You can see it on an old postcard because the interior doesn't exist anymore. While Jager used ornaments of Slovenian folk art in the decoration of the coffee house, which is reminiscent of Lechner's attempt to develop a Hungarian style, the same could be said about Slovenian painting of the time. The Vesna Art Association was founded in Vienna in 1903 by former students of the School of Applied Arts in Ljubljana, including several artists such as Sasha Shantel, father of the already mentioned first Slovenian woman architect, then Guido Birola, Maxim Gaspari, Svetoslav Peruzzi, Hinko Smrekar, and Fran Tratnik. Those are the names that probably tells you nothing at all. Their program was to create art for the needs of Slovenes and Croats, with special emphasis on Slovenian national art in an authentic Slovenian spirit. They studied and collected rare remnants of domestic folk art and ornamentation, peasants' handcrafts, collected and drew household objects, clothing, and searched for original types, buildings, and motifs. All this coincided with the political movement and the search for national identity in the Slovenian lands at the end of the 19th and beginning of the 20th century. 95% of the Slovenian population were peasants. At the end of the 19th century, there was a great economic crisis in Slovenian countries, especially in the countryside, and the majority of the Slovenian population were burdened by taxes, which caused them to go into debt with various users, so that the farms got confiscated and were lost for the Slovenian owners. Dr. Janez Evangelist Krek, priest, writer, politician, and organizer, best known as the author of the May Declaration, with which Slovenian, Croatian, and Serbian deputies demanded the unification of the South Slavs into an autonomous entity within the Austro-Hungarian Empire, was aware that the spiritual and material progress of the nation depended above all on its ability to organize itself. That is why he came up with the idea of a cooperative loan companies, because the survival of the Slovenian nation depended on it. He began by establishing savings and loan societies in which farmers pooled money and received low-interest loans. He connected these loan societies with the Association of Granular Savings Banks and later with the Economic and Cooperative Association. The building of the Cooperative Bank, which served as the headquarters of the Cooperative and Economic Bank, was commissioned by the Economic and Cooperative Association, of which Krek was the founder. To commemorate his role in the establishment of cooperative credit societies, a portrait of Krek is displayed in the lobby of Cooperative Bank on Miklošičeva Street. Its building must therefore be understood as a symbol of the preservation of the Slovenian nation and Christian social values in the time of need. And this strong symbolism was one of the main factors that influenced the decoration of the building. Sorry. The search for a Slovenian national style came to an end in the changed political circumstances after the First World War. After the collapse of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, most of the Slovenian territory became part of the Kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes, later Yugoslavia, which triggered the search for Slovenian identity in various areas, especially in the first post-war years. Under these circumstances, renewed attempts were made to develop a Slovene national style. Interestingly, a unified Yugoslav architectural style was never created, because in Serbia, the Serbian Byzantine style emerged. In Croatia, there were no comparable attempts, and in Slovenia, the national style became decisive thanks to the Ivan Vurnik, first in the St. Catherine's Church near Medvode, and then in the Cooperative Bank in Ljubljana. Here, Vurnik realized the short-lived national ideal of Slovenicity, to which local art tended in the first years after the First World War. In the field of art, after the collapse of the Austro-Hungarian monarchy, art historian and conservator Frances Stele decidedly raised the question of national identity in art. Thus, during the design of Vurnik's Cooperative Bank, a large historical exhibition of painting in Slovenia was organized, and in 1924, Stele published his famous outline on the history of Slovene art. Therefore, it is understandable that Vurnik rejected the decorative starting points of Viennese Art Nouveau when designing the facade of the Cooperative Bank and limited himself exclusively to Slovenian motifs. According to Damian Prelovšek, Vurnik could have been inspired by the so-called Czech Expressionism or Czech Cubism, which emerged in the years 1910 to 1914 and was also characterized primarily by the search for a national architectural style. The main representatives were Josef Kochel and Pavel Janak. Formally, it originates from the Czech late Gothic architectural tradition and is characterized mainly by pyramidal and crystalline forms which can be found in architecture, furniture, and products of applied arts. Since Wagner's secessionist and modernist architecture was perceived as German, they turned away from these styles, but cultivated the idea of the Gesamtkunstwerk. In the last phase of Czech Cubism after 1920, called Rondo Cubism, the previously completely bare facades were supplemented by paintings with motifs from Czech folk art, which corresponded to the national movement in the Czech Republic at the time. Here we can also draw parallels with the cooperative bank in Ljubljana. Vurnik, like Wagner's other non-German students, rejected Art Nouveau and modernism and tried to develop his own national style, looking for models for him in Prague, the strongest cultural center of all Slavic nations at the time, and above all, in his native roots, especially in rural Gothic architecture and painting, as well as in the experience of his own family traditions of church art. Expressionism in Vurnik is expressed primarily in the use of ornament, which is abstract and not used classically. By classical use of ornament, we mean the principle by which supporting elements, such as the columns, are treated tectonically, and the intermediate fields are decorated decoratively. Vurnik, on the other hand, uses ornament in a completely different way, understanding it as the outline of windows or their decorative frames, or painting all architectural elements with ornament, including the cornice of the attic and in the interior, for example, columns. He had already done something similar in 1919 when remodeling the Church of St. Catherine in Topolovo that I mentioned before, when he painted all architectural elements with an ornament and left the vault empty. While traditionally, it is the other way around. The vault and the walls between the architectural elements are usually painted, and the architectural elements are empty. Expressionist architecture was individualistic and in many ways avoided aesthetic dogmas. But among the criteria that define it, in spite of everything, we also discover elements that can be found in the building of Cooperative Bank. In decoration, it tends to Gothic forms rather than classical architecture, and the ornament draws its inspiration not only from Slovenian, but also from Moorish, Islamic, and Egyptian art, which is also characteristics of Art Nouveau. Another peculiarity of the ornament of the facade of Cooperative Bank is the geometry of the pattern, or the gradual simplification of motifs from the interior painting by Helena Vurnik, which clearly goes back to Art Nouveau. From her designs, it is clear that the patterns were designed by her, perhaps in collaboration with her husband. She used a simplified and geometricized motif of folk embroidery with carnation motifs. The geometric motifs inside could also be an echo of the paintings in Slovenian medieval churches. Originally, the northern firewall, which bordered the undeveloped neighboring garden, was also painted. On the interior of the banking hall, the entry was a scalloped archway recalling Indian or Moorish motifs, but the vibrant blues, reds, and greens come directly from the folk art or images of folk art as reproduced in local publications. The columns within the banking hall, surfaced with the zigzag pattern 2/3 up their length, are terminated with flowering capitals reminiscent of Egyptian architecture. The hall is illuminated with a glass ceiling made of small blue glass squares with a decorative band of multicolored glass. Colored glass windows with decorative geometric motifs also decorate the staircase on the first 2 floors. Helena Vurnik was responsible for all the painted designs of the interior and exterior. She drew on local iconography and predominantly used a palette of white, blue, and red, the colors of the Slovene flag, with a touch of gold. The same colors are found on the facade plaster, with the only difference that gold replaces the decorative pigment. The geometric ornament in the red, white, blue color combination is complemented by motifs from the rich Slovenian iconography. A stylized Slovenian landscape, with spruce forests, wheat fields. Oh, no, I have only this one. Yes, wheat fields and grape vines, below which is the motif of women in Slovenian costume, all rendered in intensely saturated colors. Also preserved are several studies by Helena of festive peasant costumes from 19th century and studies, studies of decorative compositions for bank walls. Among them is a portrait of the model Franja Dežman, which was used for the depiction of the woman with spinning. This, together with the sower and the reaper, fits the program of the painting, an allegory of banking, investing money to get a loan. In some, the Helena motifs both perpetuated the myth that they spoke to the core of Slovene identity and reinforced the cooperative bank's role in supporting Slovene self-determination. The national style that Vurnik aimed for in architecture can also be found in his other works from the first half of the 1920s, such as the hospital in Vurnik in 1920, for which it was also planned that the interior paintings would be executed by Helena Vurnik, but it did not happen, probably due to her unfortunate pregnancy with her second stillborn child. The birth of her third child, son Nico, who was born in Ljubljana in 1923, probably prevented her participation in the decoration of the Sokolski Hall in Tabor, 1923 to 1926 in Ljubljana. Before giving birth, she and her husband prepared a series of proposals for patterns of mass mantles for Bishop Jeglič of Ljubljana. After participating in the 1925 World's Fair in Paris, where the Vurnik couple presented themselves with the cooperative bank project, Vurnik abandoned this way of exploring the national in architecture and turned to modern functionalism. In 1927, Helena went to Vienna to study with the elderly Jetmar and stayed there for 2 semesters. After that, she worked with her husband mainly on art and crafts products, of which, this is for Bishop Jeglič. And this is the Helena Vurnik's painting for the tabernacle door for the parish church in Radovljica, which stands out for its quality from this period of her life. In the 1930s, she began to study the complex mosaic technique and contributed with this medium to the artistic decoration of the architecture of Vurnik. In 1939, she created mosaics for Vurnik's modernist facade of the barrack church of St. Peter in Ljubljana. Then also mosaics for parish church in Krain, and also, as you can see below, mosaic for the Benedictine Basilica in Opatija in Croatia. The program for the mosaics was usually prepared by her husband, and Helena prepared and executed the commissions. Her diary entries show that she was not too happy with the sacred commissions, and they were, as they were bound by deadlines that she found difficult to meet while taking care of her family. She rather devoted herself to book illustration and portraits. The Second World War dealt her a heavy blow. Her son, to whom she was particularly devoted, was shot by the Italians in front of the Modern Gallery in 1942 as an illegal freedom fighter. He was still a student and only 19 years old. Devastated by her son's death, she never fully recovered mentally, so after the war, she rarely collaborated with her husband. She decorated the family tomb in Radolica with mosaics, where her son Nico was buried, but all her works beg for mourning for his son in one way or another. After the war, the representatives of the new socialist Yugoslav state wanted to expel her from the country as a foreigner of German nationality, but only the sacrifice of her son saved her. She died in Radolica in 1962. On the other hand, Vurnik was head of the architecture department between 1925 and 1946. After the war, he was sidelined, just like Plečnik, and after his retirement in 1957, Plečnik died the very same year, he retired to Radolica. In 1965, he married again, this time to his childhood sweetheart, Milena Perušek, the first Slovenian woman to earn a doctorate in botany from the Vienna Faculty of Arts in 1919. In the same year, with the help of school sisters from Radolica, he designed the facade of the pilgrimage church of St. Mary in Brizje, and in 1967, he drew up plans for the chapel of St. Francis of Assisi in the courtyard next to the church, which was also decorated with mosaics based on his designs. Vurnik died in Radolica in 1971. The works of the Vurnik couple were so intertwined that it is sometimes impossible to determine what someone created. This is also true for mosaics, chasubles, canopies, banners, and other church furnishings. In any case, we should not neglect the part that Helena had in the overall picture of the architecture of Vurnik and Slovenian art in general. Thus, the couple joins the ranks of other world-famous couples who collaborated in the fields of architecture, art, and design. In addition to the already mentioned the four, we could also list the couple Alvaro and Aina Aalto, Le Corbusier and Charlotte Perriand, Miss van der Rohe and Willy Reich, the Albers couple, and many more. After the Vurnik started a family, Helena participated less often in husband's monumental commissions, but she definitely has a special place in Slovenian art, as she is considered the first woman to be involved in mural painting and mosaics. With the help of recent research, we uncovered the women who are hidden behind the well-known names in architecture and who, with their creativity, also made an important contribution to the establishment of their male companions. Thank you.